part 3. This is where we are at. We have these 3 right, and I haven't touched this last one, so we're going to pick up where we left off. So far, we're leaning into this process. It's getting deeper, at least for me personally, but we're leaning into this process of understanding positions in our life in the past that we, in retrospect, can look back and take responsibility for and say, okay, I see how I fell into this now. But instead of feeling any sense of regret or anything like that, where we're understanding that there's so much more going on. There's a reason that we've been through all the things that we've been through. It's also being able to look back and see specific scenarios where we were uncertain at the time and we're trusting in the universe. And because we couldn't see everything, it led us into down certain paths. Or even with everything that we could see, we still chose to be led down certain paths in all of this uncertainty. And now it's cultivating into understanding why. Understanding where we are now and what to do with those things. You know, I'm personally always in this constant state of growth, as I believe that we all are, even if we don't believe that we're given to it. I do it intentionally. I've been practicing intentional living since I was about on and off. I mean, I started to understand those concepts back when I was like even as young as 15 or so, but I really didn't start integrating it into my life until I was about 19. Really, when I first started going to a 12-step program, prior to going, when I had determined, I had had it recommended to me, and when I determined that that was a course I was going to take in my life, was when I kind of started becoming awakened to my personal responsibility to myself and to my future, and to not just giving all of my power to my past in that way. Well, it's because I went through this, or because this person treated me like this, or because I was raised this way that I'm doing these things. No, I'm actively making these choices right now, even to make the excuses that it's because of this thing. But really now I'm just giving that thing power when I have the power right now to make that choice. I'm making that choice. So instead of deflecting my own power, instead I'm going to take my power back, and I'm going to make better choices moving forward. And so this experience in the past, as far as I'm concerned, this experience in the past for me led me into where I'm at now. And this image here is reflective of where I'm at now, but what it actually has done as far as this reading is concerned is this was kind of a preface. This is a recent past. This was actually just prior to that past. So it kind of conceded into itself to say, well, what led us into this position? Why did we make this choice? And where was that really stemming from? And in that concession, we realized that it actually brought up a whole bunch of different stuff from really like our childhood, these concepts of, well, the reason that I was willing to fall into what was essentially a trap was because it felt more comfortable. I knew that that's what it was moving into it, but it felt more, like in this image, but it felt more comfortable than there was 2 paths I could have taken, and that one felt more comfortable because it's what I already knew. Then stepping into this new path that seemed uncertain, I already knew. My spirit team was already telling me this is a karmic path and is going to lead to different levels of destruction. But in my life, and because of the way that I was always alchemizing everything, I always was looking almost for shit to turn to gold, right? And that's the power of my alchemy. I had yet to step into this capacity, be able just to receive good things and just let them be good. And to be able to be like, okay, this is good. I deserve this. I've earned this. This is, those are 2 separate things too. Just to know that you deserve good things because you are alive is is a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, personally, for myself especially. So it was easier for me to say, well, there's a balance and a trade-off here with this karmic cycle. I can see it leading to a lot of negativity, but I also know that in the end it's going to lead to something very great. And it's true. And the universe is so good to me in that way, where like no matter what I put myself through, it brings me out and makes me greater at the end of the day. And I believe that I'm just as great now as I would have been had I taken this other route, but it would have looked very different, and it probably would have cost me a lot less. So, give or take, we're all talking about metaphorical things. I would have been in a better, I could have easily been in a better physical state had I had taken a different path. However, who's to say that that wouldn't have led me astray later on? It would have just been different, Energetically, I'm where I'm at now, which I believe is where I'm meant to be. When I'm looking at things in these realms, I'm really looking at like string theory, and I'm considering all of these different potentialities and how we like to convince ourselves of like, this is what's meant, but ultimately I think everything's far more chance than that. It's all just consequence of action. It's all just, what comes out of our choices, the consequence of our choices, and it's whatever we make of it. You could go through door A and it could lead you to total abundance, and you could choose to receive that properly and to make the most of it and be light years ahead of where you are right now, or you could choose to not have been able to accept that, because what this is reflecting on too is that had I had taken that path, like I was still in this point of having my femininity in the reverse and validating. I'm still kind of coming from this point. Maybe it would have taught me that quicker. But like that, what real masculinity is that it has to trump femininity in order to be truly masculine, which just isn't true. Like I said, like Jake in this strength card, like he's perfectly depictive of a healthy masculinity. And he isn't lording over women. He doesn't disrespect women at all. He learned his wife's native language. She doesn't even speak English. And he learned her language just so that because he fell in love with her, and she's like soft and kind, and he lets her feel powerful, and he lets her do whatever she wants, and like at the same time, like she doesn't want to disrespect him because he respects himself. And like, a lot of what I was taught was really just an excuse for insecure men to remain insecure, but to not feel that way. Like to not have to do the work to become secure or confident, but to also be in a space where those things weren't being pointed out and held against them, right? Meanwhile, women never had that privilege in the realm that I grew up in. And I carried that with me a lot. And so I put myself into a lot of different situations this way where, I was forsaking my feminine aspect in a lot of different ways in order to benefit. At the same time, it's hard the universe is so wild this way. Because really, like, when I think about this too, like, that's true. And this lesson needs to be out there for whoever is listening. But at the same time, like, this experience that I had where everything was so terribly uncertain, it also, like, wasn't. I was extremely certain of what was happening, and that's why I was able to manage it the way I was. Granted, it was all absolutely chaotic. There was a lot of violence happening. There was a lot of threat on my life happening. And there was a lot of high expectations for me to continue to be a way that, like, I am, but it isn't fully expressive of the fullness of who I am. It was very much compartmentalizing me into this in order to be well received, in order to be considered acceptable, and in order to not be a threat to my own reputation, which just like wasn't necessary at all, because I was already in that position in my life. So like, which was fine. Ultimately it brought karma to certain people, and I continue to pray that, like, again, everybody gets what they deserve in those ways, and that like the goodness of people is rewarded in the end, and that the despicableness in people is stifled, not even stifled, but alchemized into something good, into something worthwhile, into something that actually benefits the greater good. You know, there's been disciplines that I've received that weren't at all enjoyable, and that left me feeling, you know, a lot of types of ways, but ultimately those things served a greater purpose. So it's not that everything needs to be all light and flowers and pink and pleasure. It's, you know, there's a balance in all types of things. Again, like the burning of the redwoods is what, or the burning of all of the forests, the carbonation of those things, the carbonizing of those things is what actually allows for redwood saplings to grow. So, you know, there's a point and a balance in all things. That is the yin and yang. There will always be what could be perceived as suffering, but what could be perceived as suffering is equal to what could also be perceived as strengthening. And it's really just a matter of perspective that way. And so what I'm getting out of this is, even just as I'm reading this too, like, whirl in the reverse is kind of an innate, like, this is how things are. It's not really a matter of our, when I first read this, it was a matter of our perception, right? And that's true. But what I'm reading right now is that it's also not just a matter of our perception. This is really, truly how things are. And that this comes down to the matter of our perception and what we're doing with it. Are we going to choose to view communion with our truest selves as innately evil in some degree, you know? Or are we going to be willing to look at it different? Even in this, it could be considered evil. But that's the thing. Everything is always bothing. It's what we make of those things. And what we make of those things is what the universe makes of us. So, you know. All right. Lastly, we have aridity, which we've had once before, I believe. I love this card. Because aridity means like dry, hot air, which feels miserable, right? And like if your skin is arid, like it probably requires some type of moisture. I guess if your underarms are arid, it's a deodorant brand. I guess that's a good thing, so that your underarms aren't moist. But it kind of speaks on that balance as well. But it's also, we'll get deeper into it because there's a specific reason that it's not just speaking on balance, and that it's speaking specifically of this lack of humidity. But if you notice that even in this card, hot, dry air isn't depictive of being the most miserable thing. Most people are like, oh my God, it's like a desert. And they would mean that in a negative way. But you see that in this desert, there's cactus. There's these other cacti type plants that are growing. There's lizards. There's life. Every aspect of reality gives way to life. And this card being in the upright as well, in comparison to the other two oracles being in the reverse, like it's focusing on that sense that, like, even in the what would you call that? What is it called? When there's like nothing in the desert. I can't think of the right word. I'm always forgetting words. I need to read the thesaurus more. But even in like complete depletion, or like complete like nothingness, like the ground is all cracked, there's no water to speak of, yet that state of things is what allows for a cactus to be what it is what allows for these plants to be what they are, is what allows this lizard to survive the way that it does. What seems to be so hard and so unforgiving and so unnurturing in that way to life is actually the very thing that is forcing the life here to cultivate itself, to be able to develop for itself, to be able to provide for itself. So where like this, you know, in the upright is depictive of caring for one another and everything kind of providing for everything else, because we have the snake and we also have the owl. In the reverse, it's giving this energy, which is that like one of the ways that we care for ourselves, or that we know how to care for ourselves, that is being forced to. There's so many things in life that take elements away from us, and what that does is force us to come into a deeper sense of ourselves and to kind of make up for that lack in different ways, which cultivates this magic within us. Again, it's all a matter of perspective, like the whirl in reverse. Okay, let me turn these. So we have the Five of Wands in the upright, which is not a very pleasant card. This guy does not look happy. He looks like he's ready to fight. He's giving me the vibes of this guy that I dated a few years ago. 2 years ago. Maybe just over 2 years ago. When I first got into Austin, there was this comedian that I saw for a short time. I'm not trying to give away any of his information or anything like that. Like, I'm not trying to call anybody out. There's a weird dynamic between us at this point. Everything was super kosher at first, and then things got kind of toxic, and now it's like this very shallow, like, us getting along when really we don't. And like, that's what this is just reminding me of, is this guy. Just because he looks like a hillbilly. But he only looks like a hillbilly. Don't get it twisted. He's actually a fancy boy. With his shirt tucked in. He doesn't have his shirt tucked in. He does in this picture. Okay. Okay, so under aridity, this sense of violence and aggression, conflict. Yeah, but like I'm saying, because then directly after that is this Nine of Swords, right? Which is like being depressed, being upset, being quite uncertain, having a lot of anxiety. This is like an anxiety card. Being kept up at night, not being able to sleep. You know, that's kind of the intent of conflict, and the intent of being aggressive is to cause somebody to be anxious, to feel on the defense. And as you can see too, like, this person doesn't seem quite certain as what to do to protect themselves. They have all of these swords, but instead they're just holding onto this harp, and they're looking really sad and really scared. And then it's almost the opposite of our strength card here. We're like being able to embrace that vulnerability here of just playing music in the face of danger is, it's depictive of one's personal strength and integrity. And it's beautiful. But in here, it's like feeling so uncertain of oneself that they're kind of clinging to their coping mechanisms, and it's not necessarily helping them feel any stronger. And it's also giving me that idea of like, although some things serve us at some times, other things may serve us at other times. And like, maybe when we're feeling super confident in ourselves, you know, that's when we have this power to be able to be this way. But when somebody's stolen that power from us, that confidence, when somebody's put us into a state of feeling vulnerable, or when life itself has kind of done that by moving us through these wheels of these karmic wheels, and then when we feel this sense of lack, and then on top of that feel this sense of logic, it can lead to us feeling quite insecure. And it's at these times that, like, maybe our coping methods aren't necessarily the best thing to serve us. If we can get into a creative element, that's great. And that's the great thing about, I almost called him courage. That's the great thing about Jake, is that he has such an incredible creative element. He can turn himself into anything at any given time. Right? But this character is not even seeing these other ways that they have to protect themselves, because they're just clinging to this thing that it worked last time, so it should work this time. And that ultimately isn't serving us. That isn't a point of creativity, really. You know. And that's, to me, when I'm talking, like, especially in this middle one, like, we started talking a lot about, like, feminine and masculine energies. We all have a defined masculine and feminine aspect within ourselves, and it's our individual aspect is a balance between those things. This is kind of like, in the state of conflict, one starts to, their feminine aspect starts to come out. It really depends, because this would be an innately masculine aspect where it's like, okay, then I'm going to protect myself and I'm going to offend others. I'm on the offense and I'm also on the defense, and that's my protection method. This is being in a protection method of, like, closing in on oneself and just kind of focusing on the things that one already has in those types of ways. But a balance between the two is really reflective of of a healthy balance as well. Because a woman can be a warrior, and not in a way that's innately masculine. She also doesn't have to be an angry, bitter feminist, right? In order to be a proud woman, a strong individual, fully embracing her feminine aspect. Just as, you know, weakness isn't innately feminine. A masculine having to try to present himself as overtly aggressive in order to appear to be masculine is actually quite insecure. And that's because that's, you know, coming from both a distorted masculine and a distorted feminine. Masculines just as easily can be in a position of feeling insecure and using their coping methods instead of their creativity to recognize, thinking that's their creativity even, not recognizing how to use all of their other qualities that would better protect them. And kind of just this feeling of, like, being like a little baby, like, I need comfort. That is innate in being a human being. That's, you know, and part of establishing healthy relationships and healthy foundations is so that we can be in that state. Like, oh, you're a little baby crying. Like, no, you're just a piece of shit asshole that doesn't have any sort of empathy for anybody else and refuses to create a safe space for somebody. It doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't make you stronger. In fact, it makes you incredibly insecure and weak and of yourself, because not only are you isolating yourself from the very integral parts of what makes us worth living, you know, and what helps us build a community, but you're also dogging on somebody else for something that is likely innately natural in them, and that just comes from a lack of self-reflection. Everyone deserves to be able to be vulnerable without feeling weak for it. Everyone deserves to be able to be in a place where they're scared or uncertain, where they're hurt, they're broken, they feel betrayed, they feel, you know, sad for whatever reasons, overwhelmed for whatever reasons, and to be able to express those things safely and securely and healthily in a space where they can, in a time when it's appropriate. Everybody deserves that. And it's because that is so often taken away from us nowadays. Men do it to women, women do it to men, men do it to men, women do it to women. We just are so toxic with one another that, like, we don't actively care to create these safe spaces. And, like, you know, we create this sort of desert where we're not giving love, love being water. Fire is passion and intellect. love and affections and intimacy are water. Intellect, wisdom, intuition are air. And perspective and integrity and like moral standard and those types of things are all ground. In a desert, it's lacking water, right? It's lacking affection. It's lacking love. It's lacking that sweet, flowing, goofy, silly wetness that is affection and that is connection through love. And it's forcing, it forces, the only things that can survive in a desert are things that have the capacity to care for themselves. That's why I love cactus. I love them. I relate to them. I love that about them. I love lizards. I love, the idea of the desert even is so beautiful to me because it does take on that whole form. But at the same time, like, there's a positive and negative to all things. And really what we should be looking for is a balance. Ultimately, everything is a balance. Yes, there is a time and a place for deserts. There's also a time and a place for, us to be dancing around a fire in the mountains. There's a time and a place for us to be able to be out in the wilderness. There's a time and place for us to be collected into a community, a time and a place for us to be here and now, a time and place for us to be everywhere and all at once, All right, and then that's going into the Seven of Swords in the reverse. And that's the balancer for this. It's like not being greedy. It's also like, but it's not. Okay, in the upright it would be, no, in the upright it's being greedy. In the reverse it's not being greedy, and it's, being thankful for what one has, recognizing what one has in order to use it. I think that a large part of what served me in this super toxic situation that we started off with, where this middle path, where if I would have fallen into, just trusting the feminine and moving into a safer space, it would have been easier that way. But at the same time, I wasn't in the right mindset at this time, which is why it's in the reverse. So like, I said this to my roommate the other day. There was a poem I had forgotten that I had written, a kind of poem, back when I was about like 18 or 19. I wrote a poem that where Mars and Venus are personified. Mars is a handsome, strong masculine, and Venus is a beautiful, feminine, goddess. And they're god and goddesses. They're up in the heavens. They live in the clouds. And they have a partnership together. And normally, Mars is providing everything for Venus, and she's quite satisfied. I mean, she's absolutely she's like the queen of the world, right? She's just she's in heaven. She has everything she could have ever asked for, always cared for. But she finds herself in the thing. She rolls onto her belly and she's gazing down at earth with like a lust in her heart and a sort of envy. She sees human beings given to their day-to-day tasks, all of their different follies, all of their different, futile desires and ambitions, and all of their different, simplistic issues, all of their, they're all so caught up in their own world. And where the rest of the gods generally view humans as lesser than because of that, and as secondary because of those things, she's looking at them with this envious eye, where she's actually seeing them as so privileged for those things, because they don't even know how privileged they are in comparison, right? And Mars is looking at her like, bitch, why are you envying those people that are below us? And he says to her, like, you know that, I forget, because when I was saying it to my roommate, I actually remembered it verbatim, but he says something along the lines of, longing for what it is that they have is only going to end up binding you to them. And, like, ultimately that's not going to serve you. You're a goddess. You are not going to find yourself being as happy as you think you're going to be by submitting yourself to the lower life forms and life experiences of lower life forms. And she hears him and she knows what he's saying. She gets it, but she rolls onto her back and she just sighs and she says, you know, heaven is hell when you don't want to be in it. And I've been thinking about that since I told him about it, because that is the idea, the concept of Lucifer. There's a beautiful picture, beautiful Renaissance picture of Lucifer, where he's covering his face like this, and he is looking with eyes watering and with so much scorn. I mean, it is the most beautiful depiction of scorn you could possibly imagine. And it really does embody that idea of jealousy that's not even unjustified, but it's still not wholesome, ultimately. And the reason for that, you know, it's something that I've resonated with, and the reason for that, though, is because when you're not in the mindset of making the most of what you have while you have it, you can't survive the desert, right? And, like, as hard as it might be, being in absolute paradise and never being able to have anything to even force you into that position, forcing yourself out of that position is only going to put you into a more toxic place. There's really no toxicity on here. This entire thing is really speaking of seeing something deeper than that and being able to cultivate something out of that. Toxicity is what you allow it to be, and it's staying in those same types of places, you know. Continuing to be given to those types of things instead of letting them work themselves out to something greater. There's a lot of negativity happening all across the board, but ultimately it's a matter of perception. It's a matter of what we do with those things. It's so crazy because I almost feel like, in the way that these cards have been set out forever, I almost feel like I could literally, like, start all over and do an entirely different reading, almost the exact opposite of this. But I have a different plan for my next reading, so I don't think I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll go back to it, write it down, and do it or something. I don't know. But it really does keep coming down to mindset. You know, in our oracle cards, we have the preface of the environment. And then our next set of cards, we have, you know, so the preface of our environment. We have Whirl in the reverse. We have the Mount of Luna in the reverse. And we have Aridity in the upright. The next line is the things that would come against or challenge that initial mindset. You know, the initial mindset of Whirl in the reverse is that everything is beyond my control and that it's all just rushing into a void. And, you know, it's the alchemy of which would be to recognize that it's all a matter of perspective, and that you actually are receiving through that awareness, you're actually receiving the capacity to be able to choose your perception. But if you were given to it without that, the challenge would arise of, you know, if everything's out of my control, then how do I actually, what would be the point of having a partner or being able to bind myself to a partner or of having any sense of union? And everything's actually just damned to begin with. There's all these different things coming against it. But it's also the opposite of that. Like, it takes on such a positive, you know, in the same way, like, oh, I haven't been given to a sense of communion with all of this like energy, all of this other feminine energy, all of this, this is like the yang of yin sort of deal. And like looking at those things in a cynical way. And that just ends up leading to this other energy, other entity being able to harness your power for its own benefit. And that takes away your strength ultimately. We come through it to find that no, our strength is ours. That no, even when we weren't trusting our intuition, in this first one, even when we weren't trusting our intuition fully and could actually see that things weren't necessarily going to lead somewhere good, the choice was still ours to make. And even after making that choice and feeling like maybe we had made the wrong choice and going through all these different things that seemed to be reflective of us being toxic and there having been better choices and options at one time, we still have the strength now to make those choices now, And then we move into that where it's like, okay, but now we're in a position where we don't have any of the things we started out with. Now we have to really go deep in order to find these things for ourselves, and there's so much conflict coming up against us, and there's so much insecurity that comes up with that. But ultimately, it still is about not being greedy about those things, not trying to take on more than we can chew, but being able to truly recognize what it is that we have in hand and being able to do the most with that. That's always going to be what ends up serving us the best, despite any circumstance. And this is a reading that I'm likely going to end up watching at another time and receiving a lot from and having to go back over to some degree because it's very deep. But yeah, that's what I've got for us for this one for right now. Sorry it was a 3-part thing. Hopefully this next one will just be one solid one. I already have the idea of what I'm going to talk about, so I'm going to try to make it as concise as possible. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this was helpful. At the very least, I hope it was entertaining. And I will see you in the next one. All right, thanks.